Hello everybody, Grey Ghost here. Welcome to part 2, and probably the most dense and important part of Total War Modern Warfare. Today, instead of the gray, awkwardly sterile oblivion that we were in with the last video, we are now in Rügen, a fictional East German town. Here in Rügen, we'll be taking part in what I'll consider to be as some kind of war game, essentially, where we, close as we can with the Arma 3 engine, we approximate what we're kind of talking about, with this setting being Total War-ified somewhere down the road in a future Total War title. And we're also, just to remind everybody, we're doing this because this is sort of the basis for several different settings that I would like to talk about, potentially, for Total War, including World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Star Wars, and inevitably culminating in what I think would be the best and most logical direction for the franchise to take, 40K Total War. It would be incredible. It would be absolutely incredible. But getting to it, here we have what I would consider to be a setup of a stack, if you will. A 20-slot, a 20-unit army. Just like in traditional Total War, you would be fielding 20 unit cards at a time, and that is what maneuvers over the campaign map. For the United States Marine Corps and the, what are these guys? I think they're just communist rebels, is what this side is. Blue 4, which means the nations aligned with NATO. Op 4, meaning not, as far as this game is concerned. But the full 20 stack starts usually with a commander. Now, command elements in something more modern are going to be, in and of themselves, that was weird. Can I, does it do it again? Okay, yeah, it does it again, just because of, I don't know if I'll have to check the playback for that. Anywho, I'm distracting myself before I even started. Command elements are the heart of the actual combat element, or the actual combat force. Like, he's the one that coordinates all the combat elements of this force. So without him, it's kind of simulated in Total War already, where it's like you have a morale debuff because your general's dead and nobody's really, but you're the player. Like, the general is the player, is you. So, like, even if your general on the field dies, you're still giving commands. So it's not exactly one-to-one like what the system is trying to portray. And I immediately think of games like Rise of Nations, for anybody that's played that. There's consistently a lot of the older game mechanics keep cropping up whenever I start to think about this new Total War. But anyway, that game had generals that had just loads of special abilities, and they were very much a support-only role. Their combat effectiveness was not even really considered, because it didn't matter. There were other units on the field taking up that real estate. It didn't matter that the general could attack or couldn't attack, because that's not what its purpose was. It's kind of the same thing here. Like, there's really, especially in the modern age, there's just a utility function for generals kind of built into the job description. And yeah, losing a general should produce a morale debuff in our Total War Modern Warfare. But I think the the incentive to avoid death for your general, and the thing that should make it so difficult whenever it happens, or so tragic whenever it happens, is the utility that said general brings needs to be sorely missed because of how integral it is to your overall strategy. And that particular idea, your overall strategy, like the adaptability of this general should be as wide as the possibilities of the armory of the United States Marine Corps. And that's a lot. Like, yeah, there's, I think Total War Warhammer has done it best so far in terms of character building. But I feel like Total War overall has never really been strongest when it allowed us to do character building. And what I mean by that is in previous games like Rome Total War and Medieval 2 Total War, you had systems where it was more genetic, almost, is a way to say it. Like, you start with your character, they have good traits, and, like, you know, turn 0, turn 1, you have the characters you start with, and then they develop from that point on. So if you have a character that starts with good traits, you know, usually it's pretty easy to use that character to continue to be good, because they have good traits, so they have high command, they have all these bonuses, buffs, and then you can usually count on them to pull through at least a small percentage of the time more than a character who would be absolute trash. And from that point, they develop naturally. The traits change. Like, you don't actually level up the character and then you go into a menu and you divvy out those points. The character just grows by action, which is much more realistic, and it's much more appealing to that setting, that kind of grand scope of a game. Because microing, leveling up generals, like, for me, especially, like, even in Warhammer, where it was pretty enjoyable to level up a hero or a character, it was usually just a get through it, just click through it as fast as you can type of scenario. Like, I already knew what I wanted, so I mean, by month 2, I already knew what my builds were, you know what I mean? So I didn't, like, if I had a wizard, I knew what I wanted to do with him before I even built him. And I did that with all my wizards, and I did that with all my captains, did that with all my everything. So there was no variation at all. And these characters didn't grow naturally. They didn't grow, it was all artificial. It all felt very, very artificial. So I feel like the abilities that your general controls should very much be dependent on the army that is attached to him and the gear that he himself has. Which means, if we go completely, like, we have this milsim here, so we may as well delve into all the options that are available. I'm talking about things like laser designators. I'm talking about rangefinders, binoculars, both incredibly important things. Radios, communication with high command, communication with recon assets like drones or other airborne assets. Being able to coordinate those things, coordinate off-map things. You see, that's one thing that we're going to have to get into later on, as far as, like, the scale of the map and the scale of these engagements, because by all rights, this guy should be able to, like, if he's here in East Germany, United States Marine Corps, if there's a carrier somewhere in the Mediterranean, he might be able to get on the horn and have a payload of very large bombs dropped on something very communist some nearby, you know? Like, that's a feasible thing. And so think about that in Total War terms. on our campaign map in the Mediterranean, if we have a navy that has airborne assets, shouldn't he be able to call them in? Yes, and that's one of the things that make him a valuable link in your chain, is that he's talking to other assets that are not just projecting power locally, like in this kilometer by several kilometer map. They're projecting power on a continent level. Your air power, your ballistic missiles, your navy, your satellites, like all of these things are in play at all times on every battlefield that they operate in, which, for some of them, like I said, is continent-wide. So this guy right here, his whole point is he has assets that are available to him that are specific to his faction, specific to the United States Marine Corps and what that means. So you're talking United States Air Force, you're talking allies, potentially coordinating with JSOC and just anybody else within operating range who's willing to help for this particular engagement. Like, there's so many like applications for such a unit in this kind of setting, considering, like, you add grenade launchers and stuff, they're dropping flares and dropping smoke at range. They're putting rounds on target with the aid of laser designators, and even something like smoking a target before calling in an airstrike. If you don't have laser designators on your target, for instance, say you're firing artillery at a particular target, okay? You have smart rounds and you have dumb rounds. You have smart rounds that are able to home in on a laser designated target. So you have like a sniper team or something out there who's laser designating something, or you have this guy over here further on in the front line somewhere, if you want to risk that, laser designating something. And then you can drop smart rounds on the target with whatever, aircraft, artillery, whatever. Or you can not have that and just fire dumb artillery and call in airstrikes. But maybe if you call in an airstrike in an area and something is smoked, maybe there's a higher percentage chance that the round will land closer to that smoke, or something small and minuscule like that. But, like I said, those minuscule things matter a lot when those applications mean the difference between taking out something vital to take out and, having a tank or something, just one tank could wipe out all your infantry if there's no way to deal with them. So, again, having backups, having even something as simple as smoke launchers or underslung grenade launchers, like, that's a valuable command element, or command tool, I should say, for your element. But with the commander in general, it's all about the special abilities. And depending on gear, armament of the rest of your army, they should add, like, for instance, the artillery. If the artillery is just artillery, and this guy is nowhere nearby, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, this artillery is only so effective on its own. But if it has coordination from these guys, then perhaps, like, okay, what I'm trying to say, for instance, this unit's max range is only to here. But if you take this unit and put him over here, give him with his binoculars that's just probably should just be a default item for all commanders. It's just binoculars. Just basically like, well, level 1 shit. But you take this commander, you put him over there, and then he uses the binocular abilities on this building over here. So, what does that mean? That means this artillery has some special ability or something to, like, or maybe it should be the general who has this special ability, but somebody has a special ability where it's you focus your artillery on the point that your general is looking at, because he's calling it in on that point. So the effective range of this unit is actually much larger than what it on its own could target, if that makes sense, because they don't have, like, maybe they have binoculars, maybe they don't, you know, maybe it's kind of like a gamified sort of logic to say, like, they wouldn't have binoculars. Maybe they would. Probably they would. I mean, binoculars are cheap. But for the sake of this game, and for the sake of being a game dev and making it work, and making the balance work, we'll say like this. This artillery, set range, these guys excel at making everybody around them, including units like artillery, in that concept where they, you know, they can actually reach a further potential if this unit is alive and commanding on the field. But getting back, okay, like that was quite the introduction, but it was also kind of a primer on how commanding could change in this setting and other settings. I mean, I don't even... the whole idea of commanding in something like a 40k game where you're playing as the Tyranids, that requires a whole video in and of itself. Like that kind of... like that's a whole rabbit hole to go down. So, moving quickly along to introduce the rest of the unit cards on our 20 stack of the United States Marine Corps, we have one unit of the M119 artillery, self-propelled howitzers, to go along with our command element, which I should also note, this unit, this size of units, I'm going to call normal. Like in the graphic settings in our Total War Warhammer, or Total War Modern Warfare, if you go in there, it would be on normal right now, and that's what you're looking at, is how I've been wrapping the balance around in my brain. So these blocks of 4x4, they're kind of the standardized element. So 16 units of essentially crew, and then for static weapons, as you can see, we're going with the 2 and 16, and that's the whole unit card. Now we're also bringing, with our self-propelled howitzers, we're bringing 2 units of our 50 cals, M2 machine guns. On the ground we have some tows to take out any vehicles potentially, wire-guided anti-tank missiles. And here we have a block of infantry. Essentially a couple squads worth, but, you know, like I said, the Total War concept requires unit cards to be variable in what their actual unit amount is, because of graphic settings going from extreme to low. So more vehicles when you bump this up to large, more units when you bump this up to large unit scale. But for right now at normal, we're going to be dealing with a block of infantry. What would be considered your infantry core, quote unquote, is 32. Right? Yeah, 32. And for this 32, we're actually going to pay a little bit of an up cost on the unit and get the 3 trucks. This is the mobile, or the motorized variation of just an infantry squad, a rifle squad. Here, we also have, as well as our 2 motorized rifle squads. We have 2 just plain Jane, normal, regular old rifle squads. 32 men apiece. Here we have a Humvee squad with M2 50 cal machine guns. A sniper team, all gillied up and good to go. A logistics unit with fuel, ammo, and the ability to repair vehicles. An Avenger anti-air platform mounted on Humvees, a little mobile, shoot and scoot kind of thing. Another unit of Humvees with Mark 19 grenade launchers. As far as air assets, we're going to be bringing 1 unit of Harriers, so 3 Harriers. 1 unit card of Harriers, I should say. 1 unit of AH-1Z Apache helicopters. 1 unit of LAV-25A1 APCs. Oh no, we're taking 2 of these, yeah. Yeah, taking 2 of these. Got that big old Bushmaster gun on the front. Basically a light tank. They are technically armored personnel carriers, but one of the mechanics that we need to address is dismounting infantry to vehicles, and generally just how vehicles interact with swapping crews and that kind of thing. But when you actually bring these guys onto the field, you can get, I feel like you should be able to at least get also extra trucks and these just on their own, while also having variants of these that come with supporting infantry. So like if we wanted to pay a certain premium, we could get specific units that exist in our tech tree that come with these as their whatchamacallit, their mechanized attachment, their motorized attachment, rather than these just big trucks to take them into battle. They could be riding something with a big Bushmaster gun and tow missiles, which would be great. But that's part of the fun, you know. You'll start Total War with just this squad, doing squad stuff on big, wonderful maps. Slowly you get trucks, and then eventually your guys are rolling out like Big Pimpin' style, you know? Eventually, when you get there. And it'll be great whenever you get there. This is, my thinking when creating this stack was to create something a little bit of balance, with a little bit of balance, you know? We're not gonna lean heavily on one thing, we just want to take a little bit of everything just to show what it would look like in the field. And then we're going to bring 2 units of M1A1 Abrams tanks, the kings of the battlefield. And that's our 20 stack. Most of these units will start on the field, except for the air assets, which are going to be call-ins. All air assets will be call-ins. They have a specific time limit that they can stay on the field. Helicopters will differentiate themselves in gameplay terms by being able to stick around and provide close air support than something like a Harrier that has to travel a whole flight path in order to actually get to something. But yeah, now let's take a look at the communists. Starting out, we have the command element. Same thing as the United States Marine Corps, same concept, except for a specific faction like this, where you're talking about warfare on an asymmetric level, it becomes a little bit of a question of how we're going to implement and plan around this warfare in the Total War sense. For instance, what does insurgency mean in Total War? You know, like there is no civilian population on battle maps to hide behind. Not yet. But I feel like even in the current engine, I'm sure there's people who are just like, oh my god, that's impossible. No, it's totally possible. It's absolutely possible. And we'll we'll move forward with the idea that it's going to happen. So something like call-ins, reinforcements, because of the nature of something like an insurgent faction. That autosave tick just made me jump. Because of something like the nature of an insurgent faction, if you had a population, a civilian population, on the battle map in a Total War Modern Warfare, considering where you are in the battle, one side should have extra abilities. Or these guys, I should say, to be specific, should have abilities based around being in their own population. So, especially if it's kind of like think of the Skaven summon ability, the map-wide summon, where they can just like you spend food at the beginning of a battle. I forget what it's called. Menace from below. Yeah, that's what it is. Whenever they pop Menace from below, there's a campaign mechanic that informs on that. And I'm kind of thinking something along the same lines with this insurgent faction, where if you have this commander here, and you are in your own territory, and you get attacked like these guys are, if civilians are on the map, and this unit uses a specific ability, conscription, or levy, or whatever you want to call it, those civilians, if the particular map you are on has like 100% favor for you and your faction, your nation, whatever you want to call it, then, oh wow, that's something else we have to suss out. We'll suss that out later. But like the spending food, if you have enough faction satisfaction, with your insurgency, and you use that ability, it should be a percentage chance informed on that level of satisfaction on the campaign map. So if that city favors your faction, then you should be able to use that thing, and then they're like, yes, I will fight for you guys. And then they rise up, and then you have another unit in the fight. Or if you just like roll into somebody else's territory that you have never ever been in before, and you take a village, and then you next turn try to use that same ability, nobody should respond to this guy's call, or this insurgency's call, to take up arms. Just a little idea, just a touch on, just to get you thinking about, like the kinds of special abilities that these commanders could get based on not only their faction, but their actual army composition, how you've used them over the course of their career, all kinds of nifty stuff. And we're also sort of like the mount options, I think, for Total War Warhammer. We're going to assign him some cars just by going into his skill tree on the campaign map and just clicking cars, because we have access to that. So he can mount up and move around in a hurry. Same thing here. Pretty standard rifle squads. You see there's kind of a mix of weapons, shotguns, and bolt-action rifles and whatnot. We'll kind of touch on that later, as far as like how the game could potentially handle mixed armament squads, because that does happen quite often, especially in this sort of situation with insurgency combat. But for the moment, let's just assume everybody has an AK, if just to make this easier to swallow. And of course, we paid extra to have the trucks, so they can roll out. We also did the same, where we have 2 without trucks, 2 with trucks. So we're up to 5 right now, unit cards. And then we come over here, and then we have 4 units of RPG anti-tank teams. So these guys are specifically for popping tanks. If you put them up against anybody else, they probably won't do well. They might do something, you might have an ability You know, they have their regular ammo slot, but they also have maybe 3 charges apiece of an ability that allows them to fire HE rounds for a couple moments. Not for a while, but for a couple moments. That way the majority of what they're firing is AP. Ugh, pardon me. But yeah, they're in their own, like, these guys will be good for ambushing, for garrisoning buildings, providing, for turning some townhome into a hostile tank death trap, you know, that simply. And then we come over here to something of a rarity, I guess. It's kind of the infantry version of logistics, where almost a Tier 1 logistics, where the United States Marine Corps was dealing with a Tier 2 logistics. The Tier 1 is just maybe even call it a logistics crew or logistics team or something, but basically it's just some medics up here and then their standard crew accompaniment that everybody else gets. The 32 guys added in with the 5 medics. And I'm thinking they should probably do pretty much what you would imagine medics in a Total War game would do. They give replenishment to character models that are still up and going. I think in particular this unit should be able to deploy a sort of triage center or garrison a building and use a special ability to make that building a triage center, where if a unit is downed next to, like within a certain, like 100 yards, 200 yards, or whatever it is of the triage center, it's sort of like Company Heroes, where they had their medics automatically go out and retrieve the downed soldier as he was like wounded on the ground rolling around, and then they brought them back. And each soldier that brought them back filled up a bar, a progress bar, and when that bar was full, it spawned a full infantry squad, which I loved that mechanic. It was such a good mechanic. And I'm thinking something along the lines here, but instead of having a definite bar where it clicks and it ticks over, I'm thinking it's kind of like think about a furnace in Minecraft, right? You throw some coal in there, you throw some wood in there, it starts to burn for a little while, and then you can do some work, but then it burns out eventually. It's kind of the same thing. This triage center, as long as it is taking in casualties, it resets a clock. Like it's slowly, like they set up, it starts with nothing, the battle starts, they take there's the first casualty within the radius of the triage center, and then the medics start to go out and retrieve these guys. The moment that the first casualty hits the triage center, the progress bar starts to build for, call it something arbitrary, 30 seconds or whatever. That's probably too much. 10 seconds. So for 10 seconds, that bar is filling up slowly, just so very slowly. And it's kind of like the Tomb Kings thing, where there's thresholds. So it takes a certain amount of time of recovering casualties to hit a certain threshold to where you can spawn a very, very minimally strengthed infantry squad, a basic squad. Almost no units in it, very low health, but they're there. And then, as you can see, you progress, you don't spawn the squad, you keep building the bar, you can get a better squad. But if you need people quick, it's basically like rushing your wounded warriors out to fight, you know? Like there's that sense of desperation to clicking out a unit of barely alive soldiers, but still making them useful in those final moments. There's potential there for good gameplay, as well as just all of the applications for just having a triage center that provides replenishment for units in the aura, the occasional new units. Like there's plenty of tactical use there, I think. And also they should be able to pack up and leave. Definitely pack up and leave. Now let's keep going with the infantry. Here we have, like, this is the communist sort of insurgency faction, but we do have some, we'll call them benefactor troops. Maybe in this sense, in this fictional East Berlin town where we have year 2000 Total War. This insurgency is basically like a rebel faction that the Russians have spawned in East Germany. So the Russians, we kind of think of it as the spy mechanic from Three Kingdoms Total War. The Russians in our game, over several turns, have sent a spy into Germany, and over those turns they have fostered a communist revolution. And I shouldn't say the communist revolution in the year 2000. It's not a well, I suppose it could be fine. Like like Russia's not communist anymore, obviously, but still, I suppose it is perfectly possible they could foster communist revolutions. Who am I kidding? Point is, in our game, the faction of the Russians has caused a rebellion in this territory in East Germany. So that rebel stack, they couldn't get to it in time, so now they're attacking this city. I forget what it's called. Brandschhagen. The city of Brandschhagen is being attacked by communists who are being funded by the Russians, y'all. We need to build a wall around Russia. I'm kidding. Here's the deployment, by the way, just to interrupt myself. Sort of a classic Total War idea, where we have a friendly deployment zone, and then the actual city, and then a sort of middle ground where vanguarded units can find interesting places to fuck around. But getting back to the introduction of the communists. Here we have the Russian Special Forces, who have come to aid the communists here. Now, I'm thinking it could be a product of the actual ability of the spy that the Russians have sent. Like, it's not just the fact that Russian spy, after he has set up his network over several turns and used whatever spy resource he uses in the game, not only did he spawn, or rather, not only did he decrease that settlement's public order to the point where a revolt happened, he instigated it almost immediately. So think of it like a higher tier ability, because yes, a spy can, like in Three Kingdoms, like take the public order down and the public happiness down, and then inevitably, if you keep that low enough, there can be a revolt and you can pull it off that way. But that's like the long game. I'm thinking this spy, for our fictional game here and all our hypotheticals, our Russian spy has taken the time and set up all the pieces to where he not only did he cause a revolt in East Germany, he caused a revolt, and it's a powerful revolt. Like, it has the support of a special unit in the stack. They have a couple of special weapons in these static weapons, but also these. Like, this was not a part of the original roster, is what I'm gonna say in this fantasy. Like, these communist rebels, don't usually spawn with self-propelled AA guns. They sometimes spawn with slightly pink trucks, but not fucking giant military hardware like this. They also don't have special forces guys like this, who have, each of them have a basically disposable anti-tank launcher and silenced weapons. But that particular agent, the Russian faction, used that agent well, and they are now reaping what they have invested. But we had the United States Marine Corps. That's what they didn't count on. God, that chime. We also have 2 units of SPG-9 recoilless rifles. I think they're recoilless rifles. I think they might just be... what is the term for it? I almost asked Google, but I don't want to upset my YouTubers. Point is, they're like the TOW rocket launchers, but they're not guided. Very cheap, still deadly. So great in ambush, especially if you can get close range. But yeah, they have their complements, 2 units of those, a unit of farmers. Basically just farmers. These are conscripts. These are the peasants, if you want to use some sort of Total War Warhammer 2 equivalency. Like, they are Bretonnian peasants of this game. They are basically trash. Do not let the fact that they have scopes fool you. It's all about the skill of the soldier. They have a terrible morale. They have no special abilities, really, at all. Like, the best that you could hope for is that they get the jump on a unit that is blatantly walking out into the open, and they get a few shots in before they catch return fire, and they all run away. Is seriously, like, you could put them into cover, and they could basically be just literally what they are for the game, is just a meat shield. Like, they can take some shots if they're behind cover, because at least the morale and based on what cover you put them in, obviously, and what kind of fire they're taking, again, obviously, dictates sort of how useful, how much, that kind of dictates how much use you can get out of them. But against any other infantry unit, they're just complete trash. Absolute complete trash. You would have to have kind of like zombies or Skaven slaves in Total War Warhammer. You would just have to have like a whole stack of them in order to do anything useful with them. And even then, they better be supporting a stack of actual units, like a stack that you've actually planned out and that is actually balanced. But for here, just 2 units. We're going to use them to fill up some buildings since we're in the defense. In the defense, they definitely have their own use, just to put between the Marines and your more valuable assets, like your mortars. Your 2B14-1 Podnus mortars. We have 2 units of those, and as well, the ZSU-23-4V self-propelled anti-aircraft goons. Thank you, Mother Russia. Also 2 units of technicals. They each have Dushka Heavy 12, I think they're 12.7 millimeter. I think that's right, 12.7. I'm actually very curious, so curious that I'm going to launch. I'm going to let you look at my Mass Effect background for this hodgepodge mod list that I'm using to make this work. But the technicals are kind of the horse archers of this era of warfare. Oh my god, it is so bad. 12.7 by 108. Yeah. The game does not want to run with all of those units, so the majority of this is going to be done from the editor. For that reason, like, it's just going to perform awfully with the number of units that we're actually trying to do, because This isn't a strategy game. This is a shooter. A very good one, but one that, if we spawn hundreds of units, it's just going to chug. But yeah, different than especially your Parthian horse archers that can't fire back. So if you can set up a lane of fire and zone out an enemy before they show up, then this is actually just always going to be, because they're machine guns, and at the end of the day machine guns are effective if you get hit by them. Let's be real, especially Dushkas. Dushkas are huge Russian equivalent 50 cals, basically. I think the 50 cal is still bigger, maybe? Or maybe the Dushka is. I can't recall. But the point is, it's a light vehicle, very good light vehicle, heavy round, could eat through some trucks. Overall, our little rebel stack doesn't have much in the way of highly advanced armament, but I think it's kind of an interesting equivalent. For instance, the biggest thing I can think of is the lack of anti-air. That's a little rough, I think. But for the narrative that we're going with, you know, it makes sense. Like, this is just a rebel stack that popped out. Like, why would rebels have access to air power unless they've already captured, like, an airstrip or an aircraft carrier, something like that, you know? So it makes sense to me that they wouldn't have access to air power, or, like, maybe AA. I give you that. Maybe I should give them some stingers or something, but nah, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna. Maybe it'll be like we can give it to some of these guys or something. We'll make the command squad an AA, but whatever. We gave them some of these, and that's kind of the point. But looking at these two side by side, you can kind of get what I'm going for. Like, there's a lot of armor here, but just like in insurgency warfare, having a bunch of armor is meaningless if you can't use it against your enemy. And to portray this, like I said, there really needs to be some sort of mechanic of showing Is it really just those guys? Huh, that's weird. There needs to be a mechanic of showing civilian interaction in a way that really Total War hasn't done, because it hasn't needed to. But say we have a crowd of civilians, like you put them, there's really not a reason to have just a big wad of dudes in this particular German village. But like, put some cars down, put some civilians walking through, you know, doing working on the machines, just doing ambient activities, ambient animations, cars just kind of going to and fro, pulling out of a garage, going to a place, stopping for a few seconds, and then just coming back, and then they just do that to other places, you know? Like, it doesn't need to make too much sense, it just needs to be ambient enough to get away with. But in that environment, especially here in East Germany, like a bazaar in downtown Calcutta or something would make more sense. But, you know, you have your group here of guys, not your Marines, because Marines don't do that. But you have your group of civilians, your group of civilian workers. And then you have your dirty, dirty insurrectionists. Now, on the map itself, with the civilian population here, it doesn't need to be 1-for-1. We're playing a video game here, guys. So, I think, in order to portray a sort of insurgent-style ambush mechanic, on the map, you have these crowds walking around, doing work, doing whatever, but there's circles. There's circles that only the insurgent faction can see. And that circle corresponds, again, with a dense population zone, be it work, or like a recreational area somewhere in a park or some shit, or like at a church, wedding, what have you. You can actually do that. That would actually be pretty cool. If you actually go to this church, you actually show a wedding, and in that wedding, there's this little circle that if the insurgent faction gets that infantry unit over to that circle, they go camo. They go completely camo, and this is complete stealth mode. Like, they cannot be detected at all, by any means. There's all kinds of, like, sat navigation that is in this era of warfare, but if these guys run over here, right there, they disappear. And the United States Marine Corps is just looking at civilians doing their job. But if those civilians, or if the United States Marine Corps comes through, the insurgent player, the insurgent side, just needs to wait. And think about if it was an RPG team. Suddenly, taking a tank and driving through this area, this zone, becomes iffy. So, you have to send out an infantry squad to go check out these civilians first. You go check out... They don't know where the actual circle is, because that would be too much of a dead giveaway, as far as, like, check these areas. Like, these exact zones. Like, there should be a sort of thoroughness to checking an area, a civilian area. And maybe even have several areas. Or maybe even not just a circle, like have larger rectangles or something types, like change up the zone configuration in a way where it works. But I think that would be a wonderful mechanic, especially something like maybe even roads. If you were to have, if you were to play as an insurgent faction, you can kind of do the same thing with roads or like parking lots with say like car bombs, for instance. Like if I was playing the North Irish and I had like several cars, we'll call like these trucks over here, and I had a car bomb unit card, or I had a bomb specialist or something, explosive specialist in my stack, and I had these vehicles on the field, I could take that unit over to this and then make that into a car bomb, which is a very powerful unit. And then whenever the United States Marine Corps is looking at this unit, they don't see that it's actually a car bomb until they get real close to it, or if it starts to move. I think that would be fantastic. I think it would be a wonderful mechanic, because as the United States Marine Corps, I need to be wary of considering the type of engagement that we're walking into here, I need to be wary of everything on the field. Every single building is potentially an anti-tank death trap. Every pack of civilians could hide. A bunch of people waiting to whip out AKs and shoot at my guys. It needs to be... same thing with, like if some late Humvees come through here, and there's an RPG team in that group of civilians, and they just, whip out their RPGs and fire one solid, because that's all it takes, is one solid volley into the side of some Humvees, or like if all of them shoot into one Abrams or something. Like, that's how the insurgency gains the upper hand on a better equipped faction like the United States Marine Corps. And that's why this setting is so interesting, because it's so broad in the scope of tools and application of those tools that it would be some crazy Total War. Like, there's like I had one commenter say that that it's all kind of the same as far as the kit and stuff, and it really comes down to what level you're looking at. Like, are you commanding entire companies? Are you commanding squads? I think that's kind of you're commanding Total War, is what it is. Like, you're commanding whatever your setting is set at, basically. And it's enough to give you the feeling. Because imagine, like, this is one stack. Now imagine if we had 2 stacks. This would be large army, you know? This would be what I would have rolling around on the campaign map. 2 stacks together operating. They complement each other in their builds, and they work together, and they always stay together. Like, that's a lot of units. I think that's a lot of units. That's enough units of both vehicles and infantry, I think, to get across some very interesting gameplay mechanics, especially considering the balance of other factions who have larger masses of infantry, like insurgent factions, or less modernized factions. I think there's plenty of potential in that alone, because this isn't even the end of it. Like, in a battlefield, you would potentially have up to 4 stacks, bringing in units. Oh, I'm starting to chug right now, even in the editor. But all of that ass, look at that ass. That is just, all of these assets are, they would have a wonderful battlefield presence in a Total War game. And even infantry on this scale, even looking at something like this compared to, 300 zombies or whatever in Total War Warhammer, because of the sheer variety of applications of 32 guys, like, these are just riflemen. There's no reason why there wouldn't be a way to give these riflemen several different equipment sets, including a couple of very light AT or AA options, including like stingers or something along those lines. Nothing like a javelin or something. Like, the more high-tech stuff would be gated to its own unit on the roster. But the rifleman, the humble rifleman, is still pretty much the core of it. Like, you can viably, I feel, or you should be able to viably play a competitive 20 stack with a majority of infantry against a balanced stack, or even a stack that is predominantly armor, at least balanced in the same way. Like, if you both have the same funds and you're trying to balance the two. I think a player that prefers to roll out armor and prefers to roll out infantry, they should be balanced. And that's kind of self-explanatory, I think. Like, it didn't need to be said, really. But overall, it kind of does, because I've said fuck balance a couple times, I know. But when I say fuck balance, I mean fuck balance. It shouldn't be the thing that you strive for immediately. I think you need to come up with a lot of cool mechanics before you start thinking about, oh no, this alone is easy to balance, so therefore we'll just keep it real simple. I don't think that's the right way of going about it. Yes, there are a lot of mechanics that need to expand in order to make this battle work, but with this as a baseline, I think that we have a good... I think this is a good place to start. So we're going to start our war games in order to show you these two 20 stacks going at each other in what would be considered a typical battle in Total War Modern Warfare. Now, for the communists, we've set up in the village of Brandschagen. And as we've said, we're going to take a cautious position with several of our infantry and take up some buildings. 2 of our RPGs here, one unit of our static AT set up behind some cover. We'll go over encampment and digging in. I feel like at deployment, most units should have the ability to set up some sort of like sandbag emplacement or just dig a hole, basically, and just stay there. And based on the faction and the unit, this system of entrenching in the deployment phase should have various options. With these guys, we have some sandbags and, no concealment, but cover from incoming small arms fire. Our RPGs, I didn't place them in the windows. I actually don't think you can get inside these buildings physically. Yeah, no. So I just placed them inside of the model. But there's 2 teams of RPGs, and so there's just going to be RPGs streaming out of these windows to a certain effective range, about here. Like that's where RPGs become difficult to fire effectively. But if you can keep cool, for instance, and not fire, then they could keep concealment. That's another interesting idea for insurgent factions specifically. They should be very hard to detect inside of buildings if, again, they're in buildings that are in their own faction territory, or they are in a city that has high faction support for your own faction, or for the insurgency faction, I should say. So the Marine Corps is not going to be able to see these guys easily. They will see these guys, though. We've also taken our unit of conscripts, and we've set out barricades. Heavy barricades. I feel like it should be a feature of just being this close to a city, that barricades of this size, able to halt the vehicle traffic, should be available to the defender. And we're also going to be taking cover behind the actual barricades with these units. Now, the cover mechanic in particular is something that we're going to be needing to shift to here in a minute, but I'll go over what we've set up before that. Here's our other static AT, just kind of in a crossfire with the other one, sort of focusing on this highway over here, this turnoff into the actual city. Our other unit of conscripts we've placed on the church behind the stone wall. Long stone wall. I should give good cover from this approach over here. We have our triage center set up in this building right here. And we also have our 2 other RPG teams set up in this building right here. We have our 2 units of motorized riflemen. We're going to mount them in our trucks in the deployment phase, and they are ready to roll out already. And we have our other 2 units of riflemen just kind of off in the backfield. We're going to maneuver them once the United States Marine Corps starts doing stuff. Just kind of almost like a reserve. Oh, excuse me. Almost like a reserve for the side of the river. And then pivoting over to this side, 2 units of mortars on this side of the river to support once they get close. We have our unit, our command unit, mounted up in vehicles ready to roll out. And we have our AA battery back here, just in case something comes at our mortars, or our command unit at the beginning. We also deployed our technicals far back. That way we can just hopefully surprise the enemy. Once the battle's actually started, we can shoot them across the bridge real quick, maybe, and like cut through an infantry advance somewhere, maybe. Who knows? Just kind of a wild card unit for now. We don't really need them considering we have masses of other infantry. It could be nice to have those machine guns, but with the tanks where they are, the Marine Corps, we don't really wanna risk it. So we have them back, at least for now. So, oh yeah, also, our Russian Special Forces have been vanguard deployed into this thicket of trees over here. Just to give context on the map, they are right here, that little red diamond. The United States Marine Corps faction starts right here, at the southern side of the map. Starting with the 2 tanks, we've deployed them as far forward as we can because of all of this open ground. We can see really well, and because of the operating range of the Abrams, they can pretty much just mince anything in the open ground around them, so they're pretty safe out there as well. Like, they're well without RPG range. Even the static AT rockets that they have, the SPG-9s, yeah, SPG-9, they just do not operate up at these ranges. But the Abrams can operate at these ranges. They absolutely can send some HE rounds pretty much most of the way there, realistically speaking. But for gameplay purposes, you know, for gameplay balance, let's kind of say maybe the Abrams tank has, you know, I don't even want to speculate currently on tank range. Let's just wait on that until we open that can of worms. While they're deployed up front, we have our Humvees ready to deploy column formation, Mark 19s behind our M250 cals. We're going to do sort of a force recon scenario, where we're going to move them forward to get eyes on the village before we move up anything else. Like, we don't want to get their tanks too close. We don't want to risk we don't even want to risk our APCs. We just want to scoot up close with our cheap, fast Humvees, and, you know, if they get shot at, they get shot at. We can return some fire, and we can get the fuck out. But, you know, honestly, if you want something to get exploded out of nowhere by an RPG ambush, it would much rather be, it's more cost-effective, I should say, to have it be a Humvee, rather than a big ol' multi-million-dollar tank. So both of our units there, ready to roll out. We have our 2 units of riflemen mounted in their trucks, ready to roll out as well. We have our static 50 cal. 1 unit has garrison inside of this bunker complex. Our tow rockets we have set up here. Just because a static weapon is static, like, they can be packed, and if you plan around them, actually using them for assaults is pretty practical. But considering what our plan is and what our assets are, we're just going to kind of hold back here, so we have them already encamped and set up, ready to defend our forward outpost here. We have a command element. He's going to be kind of hanging back with our artillery, which has deployed, has this ammo and sandbags and whatnot. They have their crew spread out and taking cover, ready to protect the guns as they fire. We have our other 50 cal also garrisoning this bunker complex. We have both of our units of APCs. We're basically going to be using them as light tanks for this one. We're not actually going to have any infantry to load up in there, even though we could if we wanted to. We're going to kind of keep these units back with, because this is the thing about, I need to explain this first off. This battle isn't balanced. Like, the amount of assets and the amount of upkeep that my army has compared to my opponent, it is drastically in my favor. Like, all of these assets are incredibly expensive. Like, these right here, the tanks, all the vehicles in particular, the tanks and the the APCs, the LAVs, incredibly expensive per turn. Not even just to recruit, but per turn, the upkeep is very expensive. And the United States Marine Corps very much plays like that. Think of them like the elves from Total War Warhammer, where they are very expensive upkeep, but they are very powerful units individually. So we are going to hold back. We are going to hold back with these 2 units of infantry and also those LAVs. We could load these infantry up, 1 unit into 3, 1 unit into 3, and then roll them out that way. Which again is just another thing we need to talk about as far as vehicles and all that good stuff, but we'll get to that in a moment. The logistics unit is back here, just kind of center. We're going to keep them. Probably won't, like for this battle, because we have so many assets, we probably won't even need logistics. We're just bringing them anyway. We may even use them to just sit back for a minute and bombard the town, which could have its own implications, which we'll talk about. And then our AA, our Avenger, very deadly, very high skill weapon to use. Like, you actually have to get the lock on, and the positioning of this unit is very, very important. Whereas this self-propelled AA, like if you had these guys hidden in the woods, or if you had a general that had the ability to conceal these vehicles just as they are, like camo netting or whatever, which this general for these purposes does not have that ability. If, say, a helicopter was to fly low over this unit of AA, they don't need to lock on. They just turn their turret and then they start shooting, which has its own specific use and own benefits compared to an AA system like this, where yes, they have a larger operating range. They have a much longer operating range, where if you put them on a hilltop somewhere with clear line of sight all around them, they could hit pretty much anything for miles around as far as aircraft are concerned. But if there's trees nearby, if they're in a valley, or if they get snuck up on, that's it. It's over. So, just another example of a variation in unit type, and why this era of combat I think could be so interesting for Total War, is those sorts of considerations as far as like knowing your enemy that intimately, and that sort of information informing on your strategies could pay off in ways that are just so very satisfying. So yeah, we have our setup ready to go, and we're ready to hit turn 1 for the actual war games. I'm so excited, you guys. I'm absolutely so. Oh yeah, we also have our sniper team. Vanguard deployed pretty dang close to the city. Like, this is within AK range. Yeah, like these guys, if they actually could get a bead on where the fire was coming from, which they probably shouldn't be able to, they would be able to shoot and kill these snipers. It would be an inaccurate fire. Yeah, that was difficult. It would be inaccurate fire, especially considering those are conscripts, but they would be taking fire from that range. So it is kind of a risk to put them this close, because we would be able to outrange most of those infantry with our rifles, especially because they're interventions, I think is the Halo version of the name. The M200 intervention. Oh yeah, it is just straight up the intervention. But yeah, very, very long-range rifle. But this is a good position. A lot of good concealment. We have very good vision on the city. and that's pretty much what we want them for, more than anything, is to actually have eyes on the city. But taking into consideration being a little meta here, we do have this unit of Special Forces deployed pretty relatively close, because these guys could also reach out and touch at these snipers at that range if they saw them. But unlike conscripts, these guys have much better training. So, we'll see how it goes. But first, we need to have a little discussion on cover systems. Cover systems in Total War. What has already happened? How do we implement these cover systems in future games to actually sell it? Because cover is so important in Modern Warfare that, like I said in my last video, camping is a legitimate strategy. So much so that pretty much whole schools of warfare revolve around it. You know, like, it's kind of what artillery do. Like, even mobile artillery, like, they're built to go camp somewhere and then go camp another place quickly. Like, it's kind of, camping another place quickly kind of sounds counterintuitive with the philosophy of camping, but you kind of get my idea. Like, there's one sweet spot that if you stand there, you can get a bunch of kills. They're built to go to those spots, to those spots as they need to go. So, how can we implement something like this for Total War Modern Warfare? For the closest approximation of what we have as a representative sample for what the engine can do with static warfare and cover-based mechanics, here we are in Napoleon Total War's Napoleon Total War's World War I mod, The Great War Total War, or Total War The Great War, one or the other. And here we have some British doughboys, and we're going to try and put them into cover. See, they have this handy-dandy deployable mechanic. This provides a basis of cover within your initial deployment zone that you can plan around, that you can set up, that you can implement how you see fit, and then strategically from there you proceed. The only flaw in this mechanic moving forward is that, as you can see, despite the size of the unit, and you know, obviously this is World War I, so the battles, I feel, should be portrayed in much larger blocks of infantry like this, rather than what we were talking about for our Gulf War Total War Gulf War. But yeah, so like this piece of cover just does not stretch even the entire squad. It's just right here in the middle, this middle section. And the other flaw is that it's not snapped to cover. Like, you can't make your units garrison it like barricade cover, which we'll touch on in a moment. But it does absorb incoming fire, so it does actually, you know, fit the bill, so to speak. Set up just some quick defensive emplacements. What am I doing? This is just a show cover. I'm about to play a battle for you guys. Damn it. But yeah, the point is, this has its own cover system, and honestly, it really, like, it does well enough already. Like, this one simple thing is efficient in the type of warfare that they're trying to depict here. And this isn't even meant... I'm not talking about the mod developers. I'm talking about CA when they were developing Napoleon Total War. This is what they went with. Like, if they were making a World War I game, and they actually took time, they would have a trench that forms in the front that is snap to cover, where as soon as you start the battle, or like if like you hit the button, you know, and then it shows up like it does, and then even in the screen, I mouse over it, and my mouse would change, and I would be able to right-click it, and then they would garrison it like a building, you know? And then I can't unclick that icon. But I could take them out, and then I can unclick that icon and get rid of it. And that's the only time you could set up that trench, is in the deployment phase. I think that would be a great way of doing it. And it's pretty much the same philosophy as what we were talking about with when we were setting up our communist insurgents. It's a matter of deploying that cover and then having the unit built and animated specifically to interact with that cover. That's what sells it. Like, that's what Total War Warhammer taught me about this engine, is that so much of it is animation, as far as actually making a riveting experience to watch. And that seems like an obvious statement, but for the longest time I really wasn't sure. Was it just like the sheer numbers of it? Because I was still engrossed with Rome Total War whenever it was, you know, chicken-legged, even like on lowest graphic settings, whenever they became like pointy-legged polygon people. Like, even then I was like, okay, this is still fucking cool. There's like huge numbers of guys, even if they all look like shit, but it's still, you know, epic scale, and that was efficient in making me invested in the game. Kind of the same thing here, where the numbers are impressive, but it still doesn't, it's not the thing that is getting me going with the game anymore, I don't think. And I notice more and more that the animations are kind of the thing that put certain things, because watching a Minotaur, like every time I get bored with Total War Warhammer, I'll play Beastmen, and I'll just watch Minotaurs destroy shit, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, I like this game. And then I would be like, I wonder what it would be like to play Empire, or again, or something else, you know, I'll start playing other factions again. But inevitably, I will need to watch, or like a Carnosaur devouring some Skaven slaves. Like, there are just things in the game that are so well animated that make them their own moments. And it's the same thing here. Having units animated properly to dive over a trench and dive into melee combat in a trench and that kind of thing, having those animations all play out efficiently, that's the key in selling this. The gameplay mechanic is simple. That part is simple. Because as you could see, it's simple. We hit a button. Boom, and then there's trenches. If this was actually a game built from the ground up to be a World War I game, like I said, it would be trenches, we would click it, they would be in it, we would move on to the next one. And we'd continue setting up our battle line, and then we plan our strategy out and all that kind of shit, you know? It's the engine, at least for this section, as far as like units having deployables, it's been around forever. Archers in Medieval 2 could deploy stakes in the middle of, or not in the middle of combat, but at the the beginning stages in the deployment zone, they could set up wooden stakes. Your English longbowmen could. Same thing here, and same thing with our Gulf War Total War. Deployables are important, and cover is important. But the way that this, like I said, the way that this game does cover with the non-snap to thing is not how we should pursue it moving forward. But there is definitely sort of an evolution with the Barricade System that can be noticed. In the latest Total War, Three Kingdoms, the barricade mechanic made a return. Very straightforward, simple areas that you click and produce a barricade, and then you have a nice little piece of terrain that blocks an avenue, and then you can mount units on them, where they snap to and they're ready to go. Now, I love the mechanic because it consists of shaping the battlefield according to your needs, and there's plenty of strategic depth in just that one thing alone, but there's so much more you could do to it. And again, in our kind of Total War, we're just taking this mechanic and making it broader to where, say, individual items like this could have these little circle anchor points that the units snap to. I don't think it's very difficult, really, like for the engine overall. Like even now, it's a mechanic that is simple enough that it portrays everything that it needs to portray. And for something like a modern day Total War, there are enough static environment objects that are in most cities that you can get away with everything, especially when you're talking about things like the crowd insurgency mechanic that we're talking about. Like, that's the perfect example of something that is gameplay-wise, mechanically-wise, sufficient enough to get across the philosophy of what we're talking about, that is to say, insurgent warfare, but it also copes with the fact that it's a game, which is something that it will inevitably have to do. Just like we couldn't set up this barricade anywhere we wanted, you know? That's a gameplay balance decision to have static specific points to be able to place these barricades, and then how many of them you could place. Like, those are all gameplay implications that we have to discuss whenever you put that kind of thing in your game. But with it being such a central part of the game, it kind of transcends the sort of background mechanic that it's been with Three Kingdoms Total War, Attila, and I think that's it for the barricade mechanic. I don't think the barricade mechanic was in Rome 2. But let's not forget also the classic snap to cover of the walls. Now, look how these guys are set up. Like, come on, really? That's so cool. Cover both sides. Now imagine this same formation, but just take the wall and put it in the ground. Like, just take them and then just bring them down here. You have a trench. You have exactly a trench. That's all you have to do in order to get trench warfare across. And the same thing with the snap to cover mechanic in general. Like, if I have an infantry squad and I need them to stack up for some reason, then I could just have anchor points. Or I could have a button that says take cover where they will move to the nearest anchor point, a la Company Heroes. But a cover mechanic like that can only get you so far. You also need to be able to garrison buildings. I need to be able to drag... I can't drag over buildings, obviously, but I need to be able to drag over these buildings and then have an intuitive AI that knows, okay, well, he dragged over the buildings. Oh, excuse me. He dragged over the buildings, so I need to go take cover in those buildings. He also dragged in this way, like on this side of the building, facing this way, because facing units is a big deal in Total War. So if I'm put them in the building facing that way, then they stack into the building, and, you know, they're in the building, they're ready to fight out of it, and, yeah, they make it work. And if you don't think that Total War can do that, then, again, I hate to break it to you, but it's already done it. They did it in 2009 with Empire Total War, 10 years ago, whenever they were able to... Oh, by the way, look at this. I just had them on the wall, right? And then you move them. They move themselves to whatever cannon is nearby, and they start operating it. Like, how fucking cool is that? And that's absolutely what I'm talking about as far as the units interacting with the environment to provide themselves cover, provide themselves bonuses in the environment. Same thing here. Like we right click, these guys, they go inside, they go and get cover. We fire some rockets, we have a good time, great time over here in the Modern Warfare era. Or I should say, era of the gun, not Modern Warfare. And of course, it's buggy because, you know, this was the first time they did some stuff like this. But, those unmodded musket sounds are pathetic. But yeah, they just go right in, and then the enemy can storm the building, and you can see them fighting inside. They shoot outside the windows. This is 10 years ago, so don't, like, if you think that the game can't persist in a meaningful way because of something like a cover mechanic, you're just wrong. Like, Total War has plenty of resilience to do a cover mechanic very fitting of the setting, of the era that it's trying to portray. All that being said, though, like I said many times now, it really, really comes down to map design and how you can even begin to conceptualize a lot of these mechanics. So before we unpause and go into the actual battle report for the first ever Modern Warfare Total War matchup, we have a little bit of a scale experiment. Here we have, in one corner, we are tucked into this bottom corner of what would be the battle map for this Total War match. Here we have 80 infantry, just for scale. And just to show you guys, you veteran Total War players already know what this will be like, but I'll show a side-by-side, or not a side-by-side, but just a similar scope of a Total War map, just to give you an example of what we're working with compared to what we've already had in Total War in terms of playable size or playable area. But here's 80 humans, just normal infantrymen. I have marked the corner with this tower. So this is the northeastern corner of the map, which means the barrier would be running down this way to here. And then from here, it would run over to there. And then from there, over to here. Now just to give another sense of that scale, as much as I can, we will try and scroll it. Just as we're scrolling like the bounds of the outside of a Total War map. A nice, smooth, consistent scroll speed. There's one corner, we're not even going to go all the way into it, we're just going to continue to try and go along what we would consider the border of this here battle map. A little bit of road, a lot of city on the outside that we can't interact with, just like in well, pretty much all Total War games. Pretty much every Total War game has had cities outside of playable battle areas. And then back. I'm trying to look for the infantry. I can't. Okay, there they are. So that's our battle map, or at least the borders, without going too close into it for right now. While over here in Three Kingdoms, we're sitting in the corner and we'll try and get, yeah, that's about the same scroll speed, I'd say. Over there's the corner, so we'll go ahead and start tracking our speed. Now, I don't know if I'm scaling my speed and trying to match, but that's kind of the point of the comparison, is to look back at it later, and for you guys to see it back to back, as far as just the scale that we're working with. I'm pretty sure that I've upped the scale of the map by quite a bit, but honestly not that much. Like, a lot of it is ocean. A lot of it is space that could otherwise be blocked away. So, I mean, it's still a large play area, but I mean, even for something like Empire Total War, I won't do like a map comparison for every single one, but just like a quick comparison of where Total War is now versus what we're going to be using for our demonstration. So overall, I think that's really all the prep work we need. I'll save a map detailing for when we actually start, because those will be parts of the considerations of how we'll move for both sides. Like, obviously I'm going to be playing chess with myself here, with playing both sides, but with the lack of formal rules, that's probably the only way this could really play out. That being said, I mean, we've kind of made our preparations as well as we could. This feels even a little faster. I'll just look back on it. But, yeah, we will start with the United States Marine Corps, because they are the attacker. This is going to be assuming, like I said, just to lay out the campaign narrative a little bit. The United States Marine Corps, the American player, I should say, as far as the faction title is concerned, the American player has moved in to assist the European player by stationing an army within East Germany. It's a good thing they did this, because within a few turns of the arrival of the United States Marine Corps, there was a revolution in the city of, whatchamacallit, Brandschhagen, in the region of Rügen. I hit the button, damn it. And so there's a communist uprising at the bidding of a Russian agent that, much like in Three Kingdoms, has spent several turns investing in a subversive infrastructure that he has now utilized to trigger one of the higher tier abilities of the spy. And now there's a rebel element, now there's a rebel element that has spawned and has taken this city in East Germany. But thankfully, like I said, East German, or the European player, we'll call them, like, the faction will be like NATO, consisting of Europe, basically. We'll just keep it simple for right now. We're not making up entire factions. We're just trying to hit the game developer notes of we have a concept. Now, how do we make it work? Carrying on, the Russian player has triggered this event, taken advantage of this system to cause a a revolt, and that revolt has spawned, like I said, with the inclusion of the spies, investment and spending of the resource. Like the investment all pays off in the form of this rebellion that has access to a special weapons, not special weapons squad. This isn't 40k. A spec ops squad in the form of highly trained Russian Spetsnaz, and also some, not like top-of-the-line Russian gear, but better Russian gear in the form of the self-propelled AA. And so now we have that stack has taken the city, and the United States Marine Corps next turn is within striking distance. The city itself actually was surrendered completely, just because of how, like, it wasn't a typical revolt in the Total War sense, where it didn't need to sit around for a couple turns to generate. It was just a hostile stack, well equipped, next turn, like out of nowhere. And so, incorporating the demand surrender mechanic, the populace surrendered because of the overwhelming odds very quickly. And so they're full strength, they're ready, and then next turn, United States Marine Corps attacks. So, what will it look like? Yeah, montage. Thank you for joining me. Next episode, we will endeavor to portray what a battle could look like in all of its glory with the forces that we've laid out. We'll do a little quick introduction, and we'll do a little bit of, well, actually, no, we're going to do quite a bit of delving into moment-to-moment mechanics, and we're going to try and treat this and portray this as close to Total War as we can. Cannot wait to put it together. Give me a comment. Let's talk about this. What do you think this game is lacking in terms of what can Total War, Modern Warfare be in your mind? And what am I missing? What am I getting wrong? But, like I said, next episode, the war game heats up. Can't wait to see you.